The palace was on fire. Flames swallowed the golden curtains, the marble floors, the portraits of kings and queens who had ruled for 3 centuries. Smoke choked the corridors as soldiers in black uniforms dragged screaming servants into the courtyard. And in the middle of it all, a young woman in royal robes was fighting, kicking, scratching, biting, as 4 men pulled her toward the gate. "Let me go," she screamed. "This is my kingdom. This is my home." A man in a general's uniform stepped in front of her. Tall, cold-eyed, decorated with medals he had never earned honestly. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has already decided to destroy. "Not anymore," General Cade said quietly, and then he nodded to his soldiers. The last thing Princess Zara Adiz saw before the darkness took her was the flag of her kingdom being torn down from the palace tower. That was 3 years ago. Now she was scrubbing a floor. The marble was cold beneath her knees. The bucket beside her smelled of pine and bleach. Her hands, which had once been adorned with gold rings and painted nails for royal ceremonies, were bare and reddened from work. She wrung the mop, dipped it again, and moved in slow, careful strokes across the entrance hall of the most dangerous mansion in the city. Nobody in that house knew who she really was. Nobody, except one little girl. And if you are new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now because this story is about to take you somewhere you have never been before. Let's go. Don Lucian Kwon was not a man who smiled often. He was 39 years old, a powerfully built full Korean man with fair, smooth East Asian skin, a strong, defined jawline, deep-set dark brown almond-shaped eyes that had seen things most men would not survive knowing, straight jet black hair neatly styled, and the composed, controlled posture of a man who was never surprised. He ran the most powerful criminal organization in 3 countries. Politicians feared him. Rival bosses avoided his name in conversation. Even his own men spoke to him with their eyes slightly lowered. But his 7-year-old daughter Suah had him completely undone. Suah was a small, delicate, pure Korean child with fair, smooth, peachy skin, straight jet black hair worn in 2 neat pigtails tied with white ribbons, and large, sad, dark almond-shaped eyes that held more weight than any 7-year-old should carry. She had stopped speaking much after her mother died 2 years ago. Her mother, Park Yun-hee, had been the only warmth in this house, the only laughter, the only softness that balanced Don Lucian's hardness. When Yun-hee passed, the house did not just lose a woman. It lost its light entirely. Suah ate little. She smiled even less. The therapist Don Lucian hired said she needed stability, warmth, a maternal presence. He had tried everything. Nothing worked. So he did what powerful men do when they cannot solve a problem with money. He threw more money at it. He invited 5 women to his mansion, all of them wealthy, all of them beautiful, all of them carefully screened by his advisors as suitable candidates to become the next Mrs. Kwon and, more importantly, a mother figure for Suah. Their names were Seo-yeon and Jia, 2 elegant Korean women from powerful Seoul families, and Camille from France, Renata from Italy, and Vivian from England. They arrived in expensive cars with expensive luggage and expensive smiles. They were given tours of the mansion, introduced to the staff, shown the gardens and the private pool and the library. Each one performed warmth like a stage actress, bending down to Suah's level with rehearsed sweetness, bringing her toys and chocolates and stuffed animals. Suah accepted every gift politely and felt nothing. Zara watched from the hallway as she carried fresh towels to the guest rooms. She kept her eyes down. She moved quietly. She had perfected the art of being invisible over 3 years of running. She was not Zara here. She was Amara, a name she had borrowed from her childhood friend. Amara the maid. Amara who spoke little. Amara who asked no questions and caused no trouble. She passed the sitting room where Seo-yeon was holding Suah's hand and speaking softly about her family estate in Jeju Island. Suah's eyes drifted to the doorway. She found Zara, and for just a second, something passed between them, a quiet recognition, like 2 people who had both lost something enormous and survived. Zara looked away quickly and kept walking. That evening, one of the rich women, Renata, called for Zara to bring wine to her room. When Zara arrived, Renata looked her up and down the way people look at furniture they are considering replacing. "You," Renata said, "when I am mistress of this house, the staff will wear proper uniforms. Not whatever this is." She gestured dismissively at Zara's clothes. "And you will address me as Madame Renata at all times." Is that understood? Zara held the wine tray steady. She met Renata's eyes for exactly 1 second. Yes, she said quietly. She turned and left. In the corridor outside, she stopped, closed her eyes, and breathed slowly. Her jaw was tight. Her knuckles were pale around the tray. 3 years ago, she would have had Renata removed from her kingdom simply for the tone of voice. Now she swallowed it. She had become very good at swallowing things. She opened her eyes and kept walking. On the fourth day, Don Lucian called everyone into the great room. The 5 women sat arranged on one side like a beautiful gallery. Seo Yun in ivory silk, Jia in deep emerald, Camille in red, Renata in champagne gold, Vivian in navy. His advisors stood near the wall. The house staff hovered at the back. Sua stood beside her father holding his hand. Don Lucian looked down at his daughter. Sua, he said, his voice unusually gentle for a man like him. I want you to meet all of them properly. Take your time. Choose who you feel most comfortable with. Sua looked at the women. Seo Yun smiled warmly and extended her hand. Jia leaned forward and whispered something in Korean. Something sweet, something practiced. Camille, Renata, and Vivian all performed their own versions of tenderness. Sua looked at them for a long moment. Then she turned around. She walked to the back of the room. She stopped in front of Zara, and she took Zara's hand. The room went completely silent. Don Lucian stared. His chief advisor Minjun made a sound like he had been punched. Renata's smile collapsed so fast it was almost comedic. Seo Yun and Jia exchanged a look of pure disbelief. Every single expensive, carefully chosen, thoroughly screened woman in that room sat with her mouth slightly open. Sua looked up at Zara with calm, certain eyes. Her, she said simply. I want her. Zara looked down at Sua's small hand in hers and felt something crack open in her chest that she had been keeping sealed for 3 years. Don Lucian's voice came low and controlled. Sua, these are the women I invited for. I know, Sua said. I don't want them. I want Amara. The silence stretched. Don Lucian looked at Zara, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. She was standing with her eyes slightly lowered, her posture calm, one hand holding his daughter's. There was something in the way she held herself that did not quite match the maid's uniform she was wearing. Something he could not name. Everyone out, he said. The argument happened behind closed doors, and it was not quiet. Renata threatened to contact her lawyers. Seo Yun reminded Don Lucian coldly of their family's business connections. Jia said nothing, but her silence was louder than anyone else's words. Don Lucian's advisors told him in urgent whispers that this was an embarrassment, that word would travel, that his reputation could not afford the optics of a maid being chosen over 5 socialites. Don Lucian sat behind his desk with 2 fingers pressed to his temple and listened to all of it. Then he raised one hand. Everyone stopped talking. Sua has not eaten a full meal in 6 months, he said quietly. She has not laughed since her mother's funeral. She has not asked for anything, not a toy, not a trip, not a birthday party. This is the first time in 2 years she has walked towards something she wanted. He paused. We are not taking that from her. Minjun opened his mouth. We are not taking that from her, Don Lucian repeated. The room was silent. The women will be compensated for their time and escorted out in the morning. Amara stays. That night Zara sat on the edge of her small bed in the staff quarters and stared at her hands. She had not planned for this. She had planned to stay invisible. Stay quiet. Stay safe. General Cade's people were still looking for her. She knew that. Every few months there was a new lead, a new sighting reported somewhere, a new reason for her to move on. She had stayed here longer than anywhere else because Don Lucian's mansion was the last place in the world anyone would connect to an African princess in hiding. And now a 7-year-old had just pulled her directly into the center of the most watched household in the city. She pressed her palms together and closed her eyes. Zara, she whispered to herself. What have you done? The days that followed were strange and tender and complicated. Sua began to eat again. Not huge meals, but real ones. She would sit at the kitchen counter while Zara prepared food and ask questions about everything. Why does onion make you cry? Why does bread rise? What does saffron smell like? Zara answered every question with patience and a quiet warmth that she had not used in years, a warmth she had packed away carefully like something fragile she was afraid to break. In the evenings, she told Sua stories. Not made-up ones. Real ones, though she changed the names and the places. Stories of a kingdom where women rode horses at dawn and elders settled disputes under an ancient tree, and the queen's laugh could be heard 3 courtyards away. That sounds like a real place, Suwa said one night, her eyes wide and sleepy. All the best stories are real places, Zara said softly. Don Lucian passed Suwa's bedroom door that night and stopped. He stood in the hallway listening to Zara's voice, low and rich and unhurried, and felt something move through his chest that he had no word for. He stood there longer than he intended to. Then he walked away and told himself he had simply been checking on his daughter. He told himself that 3 more times over the next week. Meanwhile, in a private office on the other side of the world, a man in a general's uniform was looking at a photograph. Zara's face, younger, in royal robes, but unmistakably her. Beside it was a more recent image, grainy, taken from a distance. A woman in a maid's uniform carrying a tray across a grand hallway. General Cade set down the photograph and looked at the man across the desk from him. "You are certain?" he said. 70%, the man said. "But the location checks out. Kwon's estate." Cade was quiet for a moment. Then he almost smiled. "She hid with the Korean Mafia," he said. "I have to respect the creativity." He straightened his jacket. "Find out for certain. And when you are sure, bring her to me." Quietly. He paused. "Kwon is not someone we want trouble with. Do it quietly." It was not done quietly. 3 weeks later, Zara was walking through the East Corridor at midnight. She often could not sleep when she heard the sound. Glass breaking. Soft and deliberate. The kind of sound that only registers as wrong if you have been trained to listen for it. She stopped. Her whole body went still. Then she moved, fast and low, towards Sua's bedroom first. She opened the door silently, confirmed Sua was asleep, and pulled it shut again. She turned to the corridor and saw the shadow of a man moving along the wall toward the staff quarters. Toward her room. There were 2 of them. She counted the footsteps. She pressed herself behind the pillar and waited. The first man came around the corner, and Zara was already moving. She caught his arm, twisted, and used his own momentum to drive him into the wall. He barely made a sound before he was down. The second man lunged, and she sidestepped, caught his wrist, and applied pressure to a very specific point that dropped him to his knees instantly. She had his collar in her hand and his face close to hers before he could recover. "Who sent you?" she said. Her voice was ice. The man's eyes were wide. This was not what he had been briefed to expect from a maid. From the other end of the corridor came the click of a light. Don Lucian stood with his hand on the switch, his fair Korean features sharp in the low light, his dark almond-shaped eyes moving from the 2 men on the floor to the woman, holding one of them by the collar with perfect controlled calm. Nobody spoke. Zara slowly released the man's collar and stood straight. Don Lucian stared at her for a long time. "My office," he said. "Now." The office was lit by a single lamp. Don Lucian sat behind his desk. Zara stood across from him. The silence between them was heavy and tight. "Who are you?" he said. Not a question, a demand. "I told you." "Who are you?" he repeated. His voice was quiet and completely without warmth. This was the voice his enemies heard. "Because the woman who just took down 2 trained operatives in my hallway is not a maid named Amara. So I will ask you one more time." The silence stretched long between them. Zara looked at the wall behind him, then at his face. She had carried this secret so long that it had become part of her breathing. Exhale the truth. Inhale the lie. Keep moving. But she was tired. She was so deeply tired of it. "My name," she said, "is Zara. Princess Zara Adiz. Firstborn of King Emmanuel Adiz of the Kova Kingdom." She paused. "My throne was taken 3 years ago by a military coup led by General Cade. He has been hunting me since. I have been hiding." She met his eyes fully. "This was the safest place I could find." Don Lucian did not move. "You used my house," he said. "Yes." "You used my daughter." Something flickered across her face. "No," she said, and her voice changed, softer and more fierce at the same time. "I never used Sua. Everything between me and Sua is real. Every story, every meal, every moment." She paused. "That little girl saw something in me that I had stopped seeing in myself. I did not plan that. I would never use a child." Don Lucian was on his feet. "Do you understand what you have brought to my door? Cade's people were in my house tonight. My daughter was 20 meters away. I know." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. "And I am sorry. I will leave tonight." "You are not going anywhere tonight," he said sharply. Those men will report back. Leaving now makes you a target in the open. He turned away from her, one hand pressing the back of his neck. I need to think. He investigated everything by morning. His people were thorough and fast. By sunrise, Don Lucian had a full file on Princess Zara Adiz, the coup, the deaths, the stolen throne, the years of silence from the international community, the quiet campaign by General Cade to have her declared legally dead so he could formalize his claim to the kingdom. Don Lucian sat with the file for a long time. Then he went to find Zara. She was in the kitchen. Of course she was, making breakfast. Sua was on the counter talking about something with her hands moving like small birds. When Don Lucian appeared in the doorway, Sua jumped down and ran to hug his waist, and he held her automatically, his eyes on Zara. Zara met his gaze over Sua's head. He nodded once. Slowly. Something in her shoulders released, just slightly. You should have told me, he said later when they were alone in the garden. You were a stranger, Zara said. A dangerous one. And now? She looked at him sideways. Still dangerous, but less strange. He almost smiled. It was small and brief and gone quickly, but she caught it and filed it away somewhere she did not examine too closely. Cade will come back, he said. He always does. Then we prepare. He said it simply, like it was already decided. Zara turned to look at him. This is not your war. Someone tried to take a person from my house, he said. In my experience, that makes it my war. He looked at her directly. Unless you want to argue about it. She studied his face for a long moment. The hard jaw, the careful eyes. The man who had listened to his daughter choose a maid and chosen to trust that choice even when everything around him said not to. No, she said quietly. I don't want to argue about it. They had 10 days before Cade moved. Don Lucian used every one of them. He called in favors from men in 4 countries. He repositioned his security. He made 3 phone calls that Zara was not present for, but whose results she could see in the way his people moved afterward. Faster, sharper, more certain. Zara spent those days with Sua, and she did not waste a single hour. She taught her to braid. She told her the history of the Kova kingdom, the real history, with her real name this time. Sua listened with enormous eyes and asked at the end, very seriously, So you are actually a princess? Yes, Zara said. Sua thought about this. Does that make me a princess too? Zara laughed, a real laugh, full and sudden, and pulled Sua close. You, she said, have always been a princess. You were born one. Sua was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, My mama used to call me that. Her little princess. Zara held her tighter and closed her eyes. Then she knew exactly who you were. Don Lucian stood in the doorway that evening and watched his daughter laugh for the first time in 2 years. He stood very still. His throat moved. He walked away before either of them could see his face. Cade came on a Tuesday. He came with 12 men and 3 vehicles, and the particular confidence of someone who has never been truly opposed. He parked outside the gates of the Kwon estate and called Don Lucian's personal number. Don Lucian answered on the second ring. Kwon, Cade said, I have no quarrel with you. Give me the woman, and we part as gentlemen. Don Lucian looked out the window at the 3 vehicles. Then at the 47 men positioned across his grounds and rooftops, and the vehicles lining the road behind Cade's convoy that Cade had not yet noticed. General, Don Lucian said, you came to the wrong house. He ended the call. What happened in the next 4 minutes was not long, but it was decisive. Cade's men found themselves surrounded before they had opened a single door. Every exit was covered. Every angle anticipated. Cade stepped out of his vehicle and turned slowly in a full circle and saw that he had driven himself into the center of something he did not have the resources to get out of. He was a military man. He understood the geometry of defeat. He put his hands up. Zara was in the east sitting room with Sua when Min Jun came to the door. It's done, he said. Zara closed her eyes for 1 second. Then she opened them and looked at Sua, who was watching her carefully. Everything is all right, Zara said. I know, Sua said quietly. Appa fixed it. In the weeks that followed, the world moved quickly. Cade was handed to international authorities who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Evidence of the coup, the murders, the 3 years of illegal rule was submitted through channels that Don Lucian's contacts had quietly prepared. Within a month, the international community formally acknowledged the illegitimacy of Cade's government. Princess Zara Adiz was recognized as the rightful ruler of the Kova kingdom. She was going home. The morning she was supposed to leave, Zara stood at the front gate of the Kwon estate with one bag. The same bag she had arrived with. Behind her, the mansion rose white and grand in the early light. The grounds were quiet. She heard small feet running across the gravel before she saw Suah. "You can't go," Suah said, slightly breathless, grabbing Zara's hand with both of hers. Her straight jet-black pigtails were slightly loose from running. Her fair peachy face flushed and desperate. Zara crouched down to her level. "Suah, you said you'd teach me to make jollof rice. You haven't taught me yet." Zara laughed softly. "I'll come back. I promise." "Promises are not the same as staying," Suah said. 7 years old, and already she understood too much. Zara pressed her forehead gently against Suah's. "You are the bravest, most honest person I have ever met," she whispered. "Don't let anyone ever make you smaller than you are." Suah was crying quietly. Zara wiped her tears with her thumb. Then she heard footsteps on the gravel and looked up. Don Lucian walked slowly toward her, his hands in his pockets, his face doing that thing it did when he was feeling something he did not have the vocabulary for. He stopped a few feet away. "A queen doesn't belong in a maid's uniform," he said. Zara stood. "No," she agreed. "She doesn't." He was quiet for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes, something he was deciding whether to say. "The Kova kingdom is 3 hours by air," he said finally. "Yes. That is not far." She looked at him steadily. "No, it is not." He nodded once. His jaw tightened slightly the way it did when he was holding something back. "Then go build your kingdom. And come back." Zara looked at Suah, then at him. She smiled. The smile of a woman who had finally stopped running. "A queen can always choose where she builds her palace," she said softly. She picked up her bag. She hugged Suah one last time, long and tight. She walked toward the waiting car. Just before she got in, she turned one last time. Suah was waving with both hands, her small pigtails bouncing. Don Lucian standing behind her with one steady hand on her small shoulder, the early light falling across both of them like something permanent. Zara lifted her hand. She got in the car. The driver pulled out of the long driveway and onto the main road. Zara sat back and exhaled. 3 years of hiding, 3 years of fear, 3 years of silence, finally releasing from her chest like smoke clearing after a fire. She allowed herself one moment of peace. Just one, because that was all she got. The car had barely reached the highway when she noticed it. A black vehicle 3 cars behind them. No plates. Tinted windows. Moving with the specific patience of something that had been waiting. Then a second one appeared from a side street ahead, cutting smoothly into the lane in front of them. Zara sat forward slowly. Her eyes moved to the driver's mirror. The driver, one of Don Lucian's men, had seen it too. His hands tightened on the wheel. "We have company," he said quietly. Zara reached into her bag. Underneath the folded clothes, beneath the small photograph of her parents, her hand found what she had hoped she would never need again. A small black device, a tracker, and something else. Something cold and flat and familiar. She had not carried it in months. Her fingers closed around it. "How many?" she asked. "At least 4 vehicles," the driver said. His voice was controlled but tight. "They were already positioned. They knew your route." Zara's blood went cold. They knew her route. Which meant someone inside the Kwon estate had told them. Which meant this was not Cade. Cade was already in custody. This was someone else entirely. Someone who had been watching. Waiting. Someone who had let Cade take all the risk and all the exposure, and had been waiting patiently in the shadows for the moment Zara stepped out alone and unprotected. The vehicles behind them accelerated. The one in front slowed. They were being boxed in. Zara looked out the window at the moving city, at the ordinary people going about their ordinary morning, and she understood with absolute clarity that the danger she had thought was behind her had never been behind her at all. It had been ahead of her the entire time. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. A voice she did not recognize, calm, educated, cold as winter water, said 4 words. "Hello, Your Royal Highness." And the car in front of them stopped completely. Who is the new enemy? Who betrayed Zara from inside the Kwon estate? And will Don Lucian reach her in time? Part 2 is coming, and nothing will be what you expect. If this story had you gripping your seat, smash that like button right now. Share this video with someone who needs a great story in their life today. Subscribe so you get notified the moment Part 2 drops. Because trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. Drop in the comments. Who do you think betrayed Zara? I want to see your theories. See you in part 2.